On this episode of The Hunt for Amazing Treasures, hidden in these enormous mounds, an ancient treasure that existed 1,000 years before the Incas.
You could be finding silver, gold within a matter of hours. There's that much of it out there.
And then, this man is hunting for some of our planet's rarest objects.
Normally it blows up in the sky and they rain down, just like, say, a bombing run or some artillery shells.
He's talking about meteorites worth 10 times the value of gold. Then, join us on a hunt for buried treasure to find gold hidden by a modern-day pirate. And then, for 300 years, every salvage effort ended in disaster.
Some people might say that the treasure is cursed.
But these treasure hunters are trying to break the curse of the Capitana. The Hunt for Amazing Treasures, narrated by Mark Hamill.
On the northern coast of Peru, there is an ongoing hunt for an amazing treasure. The riches of an ancient civilization that existed 1,000 years before the Inca. This search takes place in and around these enormous mounds. They are not eroded hills, but are ancient pyramids built of clay bricks. They are the only real physical evidence of the Moche, an ancient and mysterious people who disappeared without a trace. But these strange mounds held a treasure that rivaled the riches of King Tutankhamun's tomb, found almost 75 years before. Treasure hunters are often local vaqueros, thieves whose specialty is the looting of burial tombs. Like most of the people who live on these plains today, the vaqueros are only interested in the Moche as a source of income from the theft of their artifacts. The illustrations on these ceramics, the only known Moche record, depicted a culture that was enormously wealthy, but no one had ever found more than the pottery and some small amounts of gold. So the promise of treasure was only that, until one day in the spring of 1987, when local police recovered a sack full of stolen artifacts. They called in a local archaeologist to help identify the loot. Walter Alba had spent much of his life studying and theorizing about the Moche, whom he believed to be a highly sophisticated civilization, more advanced even than the Inca, who came after them. But he had little or no proof to support his speculations until he saw the contents of that sack.
Took out a bag in his office, started to remove some extraordinary gold pieces one by one. One of them, the most fascinating one, was a gold head with lapis lazuli eyes, so realistically done, with such artistic quality, that I was really astonished.
But even more surprising than the object's beauty was its origin. There in his hand was the most outstanding Moche artifact Alba had ever seen. Alba realized the vaqueros had stumbled onto an incredibly important find, evidence of the Moche's rich and varied culture.
We were convinced that the pieces that were originally recovered by the police were nothing less than a small portion of the contents of a larger tomb.
And Walter Alba desperately wanted to know the location of this ransacked tomb. The police traced the loot back to Ernil Bernal, the eldest son of a family of looters that went back generations. They lived near the location of several of the ancient mounds, the village of Sipan.
The amount of people who were already heading to Sipan before Walter got there was astonishing. I mean, people on foot, on horseback, on mules, in cars if they could get them, because, word was out. Gold had been found at Sipan. Old women were at the sidelines sifting through the earth, sifting through these smashed up clay bricks. It looked like hundreds of people had been through already before them. You've got to picture something like a piece of Swiss cheese, literally Swiss cheese with these holes, it's almost like a lunar landscape.
Alba felt terrible as he examined the open pits left by the looters. Treasure on a level never before seen, and it was all gone. The police immediately barricaded the site to protect it from further looting. In a raid to recover what might be left of the stolen treasure, Ernil Bernal was shot dead. But the authorities were too late. Whatever treasure remained was gone, already for sale in the back streets of Lima. The international demand for these incredible artifacts is what keeps looters at work. This necklace of gold and silver peanuts is a perfect example.
We know Ernil Bernal sold, one of the first peanuts, a piece about this big, gold-plated, for about $30. By the time it hit Lima, it was worth $300. By the time it was smuggled out of Lima through London, New York, and came to Pasadena, California, it was sold for $3,000. For Walter, it was like ripping his heart out. Not only because of what was lost, but because it had been right in front of him, right under his nose, his whole career. One afternoon, he was sitting on one of these taller pyramids, looking down at the site, looking at the spot where the looters had found the tomb, and sort of picturing in his mind what this pyramid must have looked like a millennium ago. It occurred to him that why would you bury him off to one side? I mean, if you built this great pyramid, wouldn't you put your leader right in the middle? Well, it just made sense. And so, literally, without telling anyone what he was doing, they went to the middle, where he figured the middle was, and they started digging.
Alba could only hope he was right. If there was a central tomb, it might finally unlock the mystery of the ancient Moche. He had no money and no resources, but Alba had no choice but to start the search. If he left, the looters would be back and anything else hidden in this mound would be lost forever. Meanwhile, Christopher Donnan, an American colleague of Alba's, was preparing a field trip to Peru. Donnan, one of the world's great experts on the Moche, had written extensively about a particular figure represented on the pottery, a warrior priest who often appeared in a depiction of a sacrificial ceremony. When he heard about the situation in Sipan, Donnan headed there immediately.
Walter had virtually no resources at the time, and I simply gave him all the cash I had, my camera, and all the film.
But neither one of them had any idea if there was, in fact, anything left to find. Alba proceeded carefully, slowly peeling off layer after layer of brick. They had been digging for just several days when they struck something.
In this area of dirt, which was 3 meters deep, we found a man's skeleton there, holding a copper shield and with a metal helmet on his head, with his feet amputated, which immediately led us to believe that he was a warrior.
What was this warrior placed there to guard? What was hidden below him? The digging went painstakingly slowly. They worked their way down until they hit the top of a box secured with copper straps, the lid of a coffin. Alba was right. There was another burial chamber. The next amazing discovery would stun the world of archaeology.
When one of the workers made me look through a crack in the dirt and see that there was a gold object inside, and I went closer in order to examine it, and I saw that something was also staring back at me.
It was the face of a small man, an extraordinary miniature made of gold and turquoise, more finely crafted than anything Alba had ever seen.
That is when we understood that we were facing an extraordinary find. Never before had a tomb of this magnitude been excavated.
The intricate detail of this one small figure told more about the Moche than the sum total of everything known until that time. This miniature was made of gold plate, which meant the Moche had a technical command of metalwork that was unheard of for their time, and it held out tremendous promise for what was to be found below.
When the archaeologists excavated from the uppermost level and kept coming down through levels of jewelry that were over the body, and they got closer to the body itself, the frequency of pure gold objects went way up.
As what looked like another royal tomb was being found, the rumors started. And as the archaeologists started finding things, it was very, very difficult to keep it a secret. And, the crowds returned.
While the crowd outside the fence was growing larger and uglier, Alba did an extraordinary thing. He offered jobs to the Huaqueros. After all, who was better qualified to dig, he reasoned? Who had more experience in tomb excavation than these men who had been doing it illegally? And stranger yet, the Huaqueros accepted. Alba had turned them from looters into archaeologists.
These people became proud of it. They came to, they took a major step forward in sort of protecting their own past.
They were close to the body and recognized the object that this individual was holding. And I remember visiting the site one afternoon, and I looked at the coffin and saw this scepter in the man's hand.
What Donnan saw was that imposing, elaborately dressed figure, the one which appeared countless times on the ceramics. And now he found himself staring straight down at the warrior himself.
Walter Alva had in fact found the warrior priest of the sacrifice ceremony. One of the great moments in my life.
All of a sudden, you had a magnificent picture into the life and culture of the Moche, much like you have going into Pompeii. You know what they ate, you know the musical instruments they played, you know their beliefs.
That tomb is actually the richest tomb that has ever been found archaeologically anywhere in the Americas. There's nothing quite like it. It's a spectacular find.
Many believe it's the equal of the discovery of Tut's tomb in Egypt.
It's interesting to consider what the material from these tombs would be worth, but in fact, you simply can't reach a figure. There's nothing like it comparable. I suppose the bottom line is priceless. It's like, how do you estimate the value of the material from Tut's tomb?
Alba's descent into the spectacular tombs of the Moche is considered one of the great archaeological events of the century, the richest find in the New World. But there is still much more hidden away in these incredible monuments.
I think that Sipan is definitely just the tip of the iceberg of a really extraordinary world that is buried underground in this country.
In the years since 1987, Walter Alba and his team have found 4 more tombs in the royal mounds at Sipan. But in the backwaters of Peru, the other kind of treasure hunting continues. Entire towns have built their economies on sacking the neighborhood pyramids.
You'd go through the north coast of Peru and you see these giant pyramids. There's not 4 or 5, there's 40 or 50. For $300, you can go out and buy a metal detector, and you can take it out on the plains of Peru, and you can literally be finding artifacts, silver, gold, within a matter of hours. There's that much of it out there.
But what happened to the people who built these great pyramids? There's evidence an El Nino swept the Peruvian coast around 500 AD, creating a flood of catastrophic proportions. It may be what eroded these monuments into unrecognizable mounds and made these valleys unlivable. When the skies cleared, the Moche were gone, leaving these incredible treasures buried in the earth, awaiting a man named Walter Alba.
Coming up next on the hunt for amazing treasures. Most meteorites hit our atmosphere and burn up, but the few that make it have this treasure hunter searching for pieces worth more than their weight in gold.
Every 2 hours, a meteorite the size of a softball hurtles out of the sky and smacks into the Earth. And every year, tens of thousands of meteorites hit our atmosphere, a cascade of shooting stars, pieces of comets, asteroids, and even other planets. As they hurtle across the sky, most burn up. A few make it through and strike the surface. Occasionally, one comes down where you can't miss it, like the 6-pound rock that crashed through the roof of a home in Wethersfield, Connecticut in 1982. These falling stars are more than cosmic curiosities. To frenzied collectors, they can easily be worth their weight in gold. Some of that gold is lying in the desert south of Tucson, Arizona. It's actually remnants of an enormous meteorite which exploded just before it hit the Earth in the early 18th century. Early Spanish settlers found 2 large fragments which came to be known as the Tucson meteorites. Unique for their size and composition, they were amongst the earliest meteorites acquired for display at the Smithsonian. One man is continually drawn back to this isolated canyon. Arizona native Robert Haig has traveled the world in his search for meteorites, but the one that continues to elude him is right here in his own backyard.
We know this canyon here, the Puerto de los Muchachos here south of Tucson, is the place where they found the Tucson meteorite. And if it takes another year or two of searching, we're going to find a couple more fragments of that piece.
Haig knows fragments from the Tucson are worth 10 times the price of gold. In a vault below his house, he's amassed what could be the world's premier collection of meteorites. There are virtually millions of dollars worth of specimens on display, ranging in size from a half-ton to a half-gram.
And over the years, I've built out all kinds of different meteorites. This one fell in Iowa. It's called Esterville, Iowa. It fell in the 1800s. This is a palisite. Look at that. It looks so much like nothing on the outside. And then when you cut it open, you see it's beautiful crystals of nickel iron. This is a classic meteorite. This is one of the best meteorites I have in the collection. It was found in Capitana, Arizona, and it shows perfect orientation. You can just see where this meteorite was screaming through the atmosphere, wow, and melting back to make this shape, a perfect nose cone. I can't put a dollar figure on just the one piece, but I paid over $10,000 for this piece.
Knows fragments of the Tucson meteorite still litter this canyon. The instant a meteorite hits the ground, every museum wants a piece for its collection and every collector wants a fresh specimen. The market is unique because demand always exceeds supply. Newly discovered fragments from a well-known meteorite like the Tucson can be worth tens of thousands of dollars.
And they know they just came out here and picked up these 2 big iron meteorites and brought them into town, but nobody marked exactly where. Well, it's exactly where the canyon opens up. Okay, it's exactly where, so we're searching and we're trying and we're going to find it. You watch.
Haig believes the Tucson meteorite, because of its size, exploded at an unusually high altitude, creating a much larger strewn field, the name given to the area in which the fragments fall, and in this case it probably extends for miles.
And so if you find one meteorite there, there's a good bet that there may be additional fragments in the vicinity within a few kilometers, and it'd be a good place to look. In fact, many fragments have been recovered from areas, additional fragments of stones that were once known, and then years passed, and then other fragments were recovered later by additional searches.
Normally it blows up in the sky and they rain down, just like, say, a bombing run or some artillery shells. And the biggest pieces, if the meteorite was coming here out of the west and going into the canyon, we're not sure which direction it fell, the biggest pieces would be at the end of the strewn field, and all the smaller ones would fall back because they wouldn't have the inertia or the momentum to keep going. And that's why there's a lot of ground there. There's a couple thousand acres here to search. But it's nice and it's a sunny day, and heck, it's fun. And we like going out here and doing this. It's treasure hunting.
To demonstrate exactly what Haig is talking about, here's an amazing meteorite sighting which took place on a clear Friday night in October of 1992. This extremely rare footage shot by spectators in 6 different states documents this meteorite's fall to Earth.
When it first starts coming in the atmosphere, about 100 kilometers above the ground, the meteorite begins to glow. It heats the air, actually, to incandescence, and the air itself around it is glowing. And then the meteorite will eventually encounter more and more resistances coming through the atmosphere.
Like the Tucson meteorite, this one starts to break into fragments.
These frictional stresses may break the meteorite into little pieces. It'll fragment. These pieces may start diverging a little bit, and then they'll fall on the ground, and just a small proportion will hit inhabited areas where they can be observed.
In the case of the Peekskill meteorite, not only was the entry observed, but so was the impact of one of its fragments.
I was sitting in my house watching TV, and next thing you know, I heard this loud noise. It sounded like a car accident.
That night in 1992, a 26-pound fragment came to Earth in Peekskill, New York, crashing through the trunk of Michelle Knapp's Chevy Malibu. This one fragmented, with one piece found and others spread out in the surrounding area, still waiting to be found. Though the damage to her car was extensive, the value of the meteorite more than made up for the repair costs. Ordinarily, a meteorite of this weight would be worth about $35,000. This one sold for $69,000. But if you can't afford the meteorite, how about the car? Worth about $300, it sold to a collector for over $10,000. Like the Peekskill, the Tucson was one of those rare meteorites that actually make it to the surface. And like Michelle's car, there's often visible evidence of the meteorite hit, if you can see it.
More on down. Well, one of the reasons I like flying the paraplane and using the paraplane for our search for meteorites is anytime a larger meteorite would come in, it'll make a crater. It'll make a depression. So I'm looking for these low areas where the sand or water or something would collect, these craters, and you can only see it when you get above the ground.
When Haig locates a likely-looking area from the air, he then combs the ground with a more traditional tool, the metal detector.
This is my meteorite finder. Let me tell you, she's a good machine too. It's treated me right in lots of different countries, down in South America, Australia, Africa. Found several tons of meteorite with this. So we're hoping that today is going to be lucky again. We'll see what happens. Get that baby going. All this area here in the hills is good search area. It's all part of the stream field. Yep. Dang, a little bit of fence wire there.
Haig couldn't ask for a better location. Dry desert like this is ideal for searching. The ground is relatively well exposed, and that makes meteorites easier to see or detect.
Okay, we got a beep here. Check it out. Got something there. Let me dig it up. All right, take off the surface stuff. Oh yeah, feel this. Whoa! This looks like a piece. Heavy, rusted, it's been in the ground for a couple thousand years. That's just what we want, man. Yeah! Yes! Far out. We'll take us back to the shop now and grind an edge on it and see if it is a piece of the Tucson. It could be a piece of another meteorite, or it could be still a piece off of a bulldozer or something that came by here, 50 years ago. But it's got the weight, and it sure looks like one to me.
Back at the shop, the heavy piece of iron is first cut open to confirm it is in fact a meteorite.
And now we're going to take it on inside here and we'll polish the face of it. And then we'll put a weak acid on it to bring out that natural crystal pattern called a Widmanstätten pattern. And that proves that it's a real meteorite versus just a piece of steel or railroad track iron or something like that.
Almost magically, the acid bath brings out the hidden crystal pattern in the metal. Each type of meteorite has a signature pattern, and this one proves not to be part of the Tucson meteorite. But this small fragment alone is still worth several $1,000s. That only whets Bob Haig's appetite. He plans to keep searching for fragments of the Tucson. He knows they're out there. It's just a matter of time.
So we're hoping that since the big two pieces of the meteorite were found right here at the mouth of this canyon, that the stream field seems logical to go this way and search. We searched here for about a year in this area, and 2 years ago we completely combed the sides of these hills. Nothing yet, we found everything else, but no pieces of the Tucson meteorite. But maybe tomorrow.
Coming up next on the hunt for amazing treasures. A modern-day treasure map has a government task force digging for $1 million in gold coins. And they spent years locating the richest treasure ship to sail the Pacific. Will these treasure hunters be the first to break the curse of the Capitana?
Everyone dreams of pirates and buried treasure, but few get to go on a hunt for the real thing. This wasn't a Bluebeard's treasure from an earlier century. This is the story of a modern buried treasure, Gold Krugerrand stolen only a few years ago, and the unlikely heroes who tracked it down. Scott Erickson, a lawyer from Fort Worth, Texas, with a wife, children, nice house, who was making over $140,000 a year at his job, he was the pirate who buried the treasure. But Alan McGowan of the IRS had a hard time believing it.
People just don't buy $1 million in gold coins and bury them. It's just something that's not really done.
Oh, yes, it is. And Scott Erickson did it. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story actually began when the postal inspectors in Fort Worth got wind of someone going from post office to post office buying a lot of money orders just below the reportable limit. This drew the attention of an alert postal clerk, and she reported it.
Normally, when we would get this kind of a telephone call, we would suspect that the individuals were engaged in narcotics activity and attempting to launder funds that were the proceeds of this activity.
Through surveillance, they determined the money orders were being purchased by a Mark Stephen Van Horn, and Van Horn was getting the cash he was using from his brother, Scott Erickson. So they staked out Erickson's house, watched his comings and goings, and did what you do when you want to know someone's secrets. You look in their garbage.
The Supreme Court has decided that when you set your trash out on the curb, that it's public, and anybody who wants it is welcome to it.
In the trash, they found accounts that showed sums adding up to over $3 million. Erickson had embezzled it from the government, no less, or more accurately, from the Resolution Trust Corporation, a government agency and client of Erickson's law firm. 4 government agencies swooped down on Erickson's house and his safe deposit box.
They had already found $600,000 in cash and another $400,000 in gold coin, which was pretty stunning.
When the dust settled, there was still over $1 million missing.
We found a file that was actually marked gold on the top, and as we began to go through this file, in the front of the file there were receipts for gold purchases. They started to total into the thousands, and then hundreds of thousands, and then into the millions.
The purchases were mostly Krugerrands, gold coins weighing exactly 1 ounce each. Krugerrands are easy to move around and convertible to cash almost anywhere. Excellent treasure for a pirate. But there was something else lurking in the file.
Rob pulls out some graph paper with lines drawn on it and landmarks and distances.
It looked like a treasure map?
And we were thinking, no, it can't be. This isn't really a treasure map. We're just imagining that.
Think again. As weird as it seemed to the task force, a treasure map is exactly what it was, with some lines intersecting at a central point.
I slid that map in front of him, and without even asking him what it was, I said, "Where is this?" And he looked at me and said, "It's in Paradise, California."
Where in California? Well, Paradise is near the legendary Mother Lode, where gold was discovered leading to the Great Gold Rush of 1848, a very appropriate place for a treasure hunt.
We were out there just like the gold rush, just like the 49ers. We were hoping to come back with gold.
Yeah, we felt we were on a treasure hunt.
The task force flew to Paradise, California, and prepared to go wherever the map would take them.
Since we're talking about $1 million in gold, that could weigh close to 200 pounds, so you'd have to drive it in. You'd have to have a road to get 200 pounds of gold to the place where you want to bury.
What really tipped us off was when we got to this briar patch, the blackberry patch. However, this blackberry patch, over the course of 2 years, had probably grown over, 20 square yards.
So they brought out the treasure hunter's most trustworthy companion, a metal detector. Actually, they got hold of a local treasure hunter who was more than eager to assist. But after sweeping the area for a considerable amount of time, the detector failed to detect.
And on the graph paper there were azimuths, and each azimuth had a marker that it was associated with, and it was marked tree stump, rock, and then it had the word spike written next to several of the trees.
10 penny nails had been hammered into trees. Distances had been marked off from the 10 penny nail, and all of these angles intersected in the middle of the berry patch.
Where the lines intersect, X marks the spot.
took string with us and ran the string between the landmarks, and where the center spot was, we began to dig.
And they dug some more.
We dug actually for about 4 or 5 hours and don't find anything.
At that point, I decided that finding this was going to be a little more difficult than I had hoped it would be.
Had Scott Erickson played a trick on them? Was this a red herring treasure map, one designed to throw them completely off the trail? Did he really bury $1 million in gold out here?
We got the string out again, shot the azimuths again.
This time the X fell on a different spot. Someone made an error. They had been digging in the wrong place.
And the second time it was about 4 or 5 feet to the right of where we had originally dug. So we began to dig, and we dug, and dug, and dug, and we heard a shovel hit something.
I think we might have found it.
And shovels came out, everybody went into the hole and started moving the dirt around with our hands, and the first thing that we actually saw come out was the end cap of a PVC pipe.
Scott had told them he buried the gold in PVC, so he had been telling the truth, and this treasure map was the genuine thing.
However, what we didn't know is, as we moved a little bit further to the right, we hit an ice chest. And this was just a run-of-the-mill Coleman ice chest, which probably weighed about 400 pounds. It took myself and 2 other guys to lift this ice chest out of the hole. And the hole's about 6 feet deep.
They recovered 21 tubes filled with gold and 1 ice chest, contents unknown. When they got the haul back to a secure postal facility in Sacramento, they opened the chest.
There were 2 bags of Kruger ants in there that had broken open, and as you can see in the video, it looks like pirate gold.
And now we have loose coins in here. We'll count these in a moment.
What we found inside the containers was 2,700 gold coins, Kruger ants, American Eagles, worth in excess of $1 million.
But there was one last problem.
200 pounds of gold, you can't carry that in your luggage on the plane back. You know, there's all sorts of things you got to concern yourself with about if you find $1 million in gold.
The Air Force came to the rescue and offered to fly the gold back to Texas. The Krugerrands were sold at auction and netted some $1.3 million, all returned to the government. Every single penny Scott Erickson embezzled had been recovered. And now what happens to Scott and his brother Mark? They're still awaiting sentencing, but the brothers got a chance to play pirate for real.
In the interviews, he said that he kind of looked at himself as a pirate. He and his brother had played pirates when they were kids, and he believed that if he buried it in the ground, nobody would ever find it, and so he was wrong.
But Scott Erickson did send the representatives of 4 government agencies on a hunt for $1 million in buried treasure. And unlike many treasure hunters out there today, they actually found it.
Coming up next. Treasure hunting can be a dangerous business, but were these soldiers there to protect the treasure or to take it?
Capitana, sailing from the port of Guayaquil, Ecuador, was one of the most heavily laden treasure ships ever to be lost at sea. She was carrying the largest shipment of silver the Spanish ever attempted to return to Spain. For 300 years, every effort to retrieve this treasure has ended in disaster, leading many to believe the ship was cursed. Rob McClung is the latest treasure hunter to try and defy the curse of the Capitana.
Capitana was a grand ship. It was the biggest ship ever built in the New World by the Spanish. It was built in Guayaquil. It took several years to build it. It was the pride of the Spanish Armada on the Pacific side.
The ship was a monster. It was 1,200 tons of displacement.
Don McKay is a partner in McClung's venture.
This was a huge ship. It was the largest ship that ever sailed back and forth from Peru to Panama.
It was also one of the heaviest loaded treasure ships of all time, carrying tons of silver for the king and the personal treasure of all the passengers.
The manifest of this ship reads, massive amount of silver. They call it the wall of silver bars, weighing approximately 80 pounds apiece. Massive amounts of silver coinage, specie, all minted in Potosi, 2,500 coins to a box.
Potosi Mountain in Bolivia was the world's largest single source of silver in the 17th century. The King of Spain desperately needed its riches for his treasury, but getting it was an enormous challenge. The Spanish enslaved thousands of Indians to work the mine. Many died under the brutal conditions. And legend has it that the Indians cursed the silver before it began its journey to Spain. The Pacific Fleet would sail from Lima, working its way up the coast to the Panamanian Isthmus. Here the treasure would be offloaded onto mule trains, which would carry it to the ships waiting on the Atlantic side. Then to Havana to join the waiting armada and across the ocean to Spain. The entire journey could take half a year. English pirates working the Pacific coast had forced the king to delay the shipment of 4 years' worth of silver, but he couldn't wait any longer. The king ordered the Capitana to Guayaquil, where the silver was waiting on the docks, along with the passengers and their belongings.
The king gets 1/5 of everything that's being transported. There were some 600 merchants on the ship. They were transporting their trade goods and their personal treasures.
The crown needed the silver to finance its European wars, and there was pressure to sail with as much treasure as she could carry. The ship was so heavily loaded, she rode dangerously low in the water. La Capitana left port on October 18, 1654. In just days, she met a fierce tropical storm. The navigator mistakenly sailed the ship head-on toward the coast. She crashed against a reef, ripped out her hull, and quickly sank. Some believe the disaster was caused by the Indian curse. But almost everyone made it to shore, and the captain organized the first salvage attempt. Because of the frequency of shipwrecks, the Spanish had developed sophisticated diving techniques, enabling them to stay underwater for lengthy periods of time. But when one of the divers was bitten by a fearsome sea snake and died, the crew became spooked. Many now believing the treasure was indeed cursed. The salvage process slowed and came to a stop. Half the silver was successfully salvaged, but the curse of the Capitana made sure none ever arrived in Spain. The treasure was split up on 2 new ships, and both vanished in separate storms. Cursed and doomed, the treasure lay forgotten for 300 years. In 1992, an ex-police chief from Colorado got bitten by the treasure hunting bug. Using his police investigative training techniques, he was determined to find the Capitana's sunken treasure.
Finding the pieces of the puzzle are imperative on any shipwreck, whether it's in Spain, in Seville, looking through the archives, whether it's pieces of information from local fishermen.
McClung found the first pieces here in Seville at the Archivo General de los Indios, the Archive of the Indies. Pablo Perez Mayaina is chairman of Latin American history at the University of Seville and an expert in interpreting the ancient documents.
For historians, a bureaucracy is our best source of information, for it is the tool with which we, today, can reconstruct our past.
At the archive, McClung dug through 40,000 boxes of documents, records of every bar of silver, every bolt of cloth, every passenger, and logs of each day of passage for every ship that crossed the Atlantic for a period covering over 300 years.
So you take all of that, it makes one large composite, the information is then sorted, and you have to think in terms of how this wreck happened. You have to make your own picture.
There was always an investigation after a shipwreck, especially where cannons and precious cargo had been lost. Who was responsible for the ship having wrecked? Why did it wreck? Who should take responsibility for the loss? Should anyone go to jail? Researchers going through these investigative reports can get an idea as to why the ship wrecked and where it went down. They must know how to follow a lead when they read an interesting document. In a way, they have to be rather like a secret agent or a private detective.
McClung's research in Seville convinced him he had pinpointed the general location of the wreck. Chandouille was the name of the reef the Capitana struck, and it is still on the maps today, not far from this fishing village. McClung secured a permit and struck a deal with the Ecuadorian government. They would split the treasure 50-50. So with initial financing, they were ready to start their search for the ship. But were the treasure hunters going to escape the Capitana's curse?
When we came into Ecuadorian waters with the RV Explorer back in February, we were immediately greeted with between 3 and 4 gunboats from Ecuador. And during our entire stay there, which amounted to about 4 months, we had gunboats around us all the time. They were there to protect us, to protect my crew, my boat from bandidos.
The guards, it's very clear, the guards are not for people boarding. The guards are here to watch us on your own boat. 24 hours a day, living on this boat with guards with automatic weapons, checking in, checking out. They've got to know where we are. It's a lot like being a prisoner on your own boat.
But McClung and company forgot about the Ecuadorians as they got busy diving the target area and the challenge of finding the treasure.
I couldn't see anything. So you have to imagine, this is swimming braille. I had to feel literally the bottom because 3 feet from the bottom, it's all silt and mud. The metal detector started ringing. I dug up about 100 coins. We found her where the research told us it would be. She was in 30 feet of water. I was so excited I just couldn't stop. I came back up, dumped the coins out on the deck, and my 2 amigos just opened their mouths but couldn't speak.
The intensive research paid off. Incredibly, it took Rob McClung only 4 days to find the site. Nobody on the crew had ever located a treasure this fast. Everyone was feeling very lucky. The curse of the Capitana was finally lifting. They found one of the most heavily laden treasure ships of the 17th century, and with half the treasure as their end of the deal, they were all going to be enormously wealthy. Every day brought new treasures. The expedition's divers quickly recovered more than 5,000 silver coins, 3 64-pound silver bars, dozens of bronze cannonballs, and a single solitary gold coin. And this was only the tip of the iceberg.
Our contract did include the terms of turning over all of the artifacts, the treasure that we did find, to the government, and to place those artifacts either in the government's bank or into a laboratory for conservation, which we did.
Each day's haul, handed over to the Ecuadorian Navy, was taken to an Army base for safekeeping. Rob McClung showed up as scheduled at a government ministry to get his group's half of the treasure. But there was a delay, and finally, the news that things had changed. The Minister of Natural Patrimony had decided that the treasure had better stay in Ecuador. All of the treasure.
The distribution to our group was not rendered, nor has it been rendered to this date.
So, once again, the treasure of the Capitana has escaped someone's grasp. After 4 years of work and research, Rob McClung finds himself empty-handed.
Some people might say that the treasure is cursed because it has been lost, it has been found, it's been lost again and found again. I use the word elusive. This treasure has been elusive since the beginning. It eluded the King of Spain. It eluded the Salvors when they tried to bring everything up.
And it eludes Rob McClung and Don McKay. They hope for a change in government, one that would honor their contract and let them resume salvaging. But in the meantime, they can only wait, feeling frustrated and double-crossed. And the Capitana's treasure waits with them, still hidden underwater and perhaps still protected by an ancient Indian curse.
The hunt for amazing treasures will be right back.